In this tutorial, I want to talk to you guys about using the return statement in Python functions. Now, a Python function is basically just a collection of Python code that performs a specific task. And when we want to perform that task in our Python programs, we can call a Python function. And a lot of times when we're calling a Python function, we just kind of call it and it does its thing and then we move on with the program. But sometimes when we call a function, we're actually going to want to get information back from that function. So when I call the function, I want it to basically execute its task. I want it to execute all the code. And then I want it to give me some information back. So that could be like a particular value. It could be something like telling me how the task went. Basically, the function can just communicate back to us like, hey, here's some information. And that's what the return keyword can allow us to do. The return keyword can basically allow Python to return information from a function. So I'm going to show you guys how we can do this. I want to create a very simple function, and it's just going to cube a number. So when we cube a number, we take it to the power of 3. So if I was going to cube 2, it'd be 2 raised to the power of 3. Right? It's just pretty basic math. So we're going to make a function that will cube a number, and I'll show you guys how we can use that return statement. So first thing we want to do is make a function. I'm just going to say def cube. We'll call the function cube. And over here we can specify any parameters that this function will take. So basically any values that we want to give this function. So we're going to give it one function, which is just going to be a number. So I'm just going to call it num. And then over here I'm going to type out a colon. And then down here we can put any of the code that we want to be included in this function. So basically this function is just going to cube this number. So we could just type out num times num times num, right? That's going to give us num cubed. So that's all well and good. And if I come down here, I can execute this function. So I can basically just call it, I'll say cube. And why don't we pass it a 3? So I'm going to go ahead and pass it a 3. And I'm going to save this. And now let's go ahead and run this code. So we'll run the code, and you'll see down here, nothing happened, right? So nothing got printed out in our program. In fact, when we called this cube function, it didn't really do anything. So let me try to print this out. So maybe if we print this function out, it'll give us back the information that we want. So type out print, and we'll print out the value of the function. I'm just going to click play. If you look down here, it says none. So when I printed out the value of this function, it told me none. But really, this function is supposed to be cubing the number. And here's how we can use the return statement in Python. I can come over here and I can just say return. And now Python is going to return whatever value we put over here to the right. So when I call this cube function and I give it a 3, Python's going to go off, it's going to execute this function. When it sees this return statement, it's going to say, okay, I want to give a value back to whatever called this function, and it's going to return this value. Now, when I print out cube 3, it should print out the answer because we get an answer back. So when I play this, you'll see down here, it says 27, so we got the correct answer. So I could do this with anything. Why don't we cube 4 or something? So now I'll run this, and you can see we're constantly getting the correct answer back. So that's the basics of using this return statement. It allows us to return a value back to the caller. In other words, back to whatever's calling the function. So I just want to illustrate this point a little bit further. I'm going to come up here. I'm actually going to create a variable. So I'm going to create a variable called result, and I'm just going to set it equal to cube 4. This variable result is going to store the value that gets returned from the cube function. So it's not going to store cube 4, it's going to store the value that gets returned from executing that function. So now if I came down here and printed out result, it's actually just going to print out 64 again because that's the value that it's storing. So this return statement can be really useful for getting information back from a function. We can use something like a parameter, like this 4 is a parameter, and we can give information to a function, and then we can use the return statement to get information back from a function. And I do just want to point out one more thing. I'm actually not able to put any code after this return statement. So if I came down here and tried to put like a print statement, this actually isn't going to work. So this is never going to get printed out. So if I just typed out like code right here, when we run this program, it's not going to type out code. That's because when I use this return keyword, it breaks us out of the function. So Python's going to go through, it's going to execute the code in the function. Whenever it sees this return keyword, it's just going to break back out and we're going to be done. So we'll never be able to reach this line of code. So that's the basics of using return statements, and you can return any data type you want. We could easily return like a string or a Boolean or an array. It doesn't really matter. You can return whatever you want. And a lot of times, in a lot of situations, you're going to want to get a value back from a function.